whatever, white supremacy, and also this using white man as an insult. Do you have a mirror? Like, this is such a strange thing that's happening with white women who are generally benefiting from this, especially from first world countries, go in and like try to demonize white. Like, this internalized racism is very confusing to me. Yes, my partner is a strong, independent woman who's educated, and to go against your simple narrative, also a person of color, which doesn't matter to me, but I know to you it's a bit shocking that a person of color can be way more privileged than a white guy.
Now, I am not sure where he was raised or where he lives currently and what the historical context of race relations is there. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be talking about it in the American context because that's where I was raised and where I currently live. So I don't know how many times this has to be said, but I will say it again. Racism against white people does not exist. I constantly hear other white people bringing up white people's supposed internalized racism anytime they actually speak up and try to hold those other white people accountable for their own acts of racism. And that's because those accusations make them feel uncomfortable. It's a very similar impetus that causes the whole not all men backlash. People like this don't want to be labeled as racist. They don't want to be labeled as the bad guys. And in a racism conversation specifically, they either want to also try to paint a picture that like black folks or folks of color don't have it that bad, or the opposite end of that coin, that they want to say like, oh, well, I have challenges too, and I struggle too, and so why should black folks get special treatment? Why are they taking my jobs or my kids' scholarships or whatever it might be? All of it is just a distraction from the reality of institutionalized racism and sexism. Because ultimately, racists and sexists want to preserve the systems that privilege them over others. And let me break this down. Stereotypes about white people do exist. They are what we would call examples of racial prejudice. This is not racism because it's not backed by systemic power. If a black person calls you a slur of some kind or says something like, you can't dance because you're white, I can't, you might be upset about it, and that's pretty much where it's gonna end. And that's because black folks don't have the same institutional power as white folks. They cannot define how you live your life or the access you have to certain opportunities. Meanwhile, when white people use a slur or perpetuate ideas about some innate characteristics or capabilities of black folks based solely on their race, which, by the way, many of those ideas are based on hundreds of years of Eurocentric thinking rooted in colonialism and outright lies. That results in things impacting black folks' ability to survive and thrive. Things like discriminatory housing practices, redlining neighborhoods, lack of access to healthcare or lack of access to equitable outcomes in healthcare, police brutality, mass incarceration, intentional pollution, and the destruction of black and brown communities. The list goes on and on. So while white people are out here getting mad that the Little Mermaid is black folks are out here dying in the streets because they decided to go on a jog in the wrong neighborhood. But please, tell me more about how black people can be more privileged than white people, and you're not racist because you're in a relationship with a person of color. I hate to break it to you, but just because you're in a relationship with a person of color does not automatically make you not racist. You still gotta do the work daily, my guy, and your content is evidence that you got a lot of it to do. And the other really important thing I want to talk about here is this idea that white people can't talk about white supremacy or racism because they're white. And if they're doing that, it must be because they hate themselves or they're trying to be white saviors. So I want white people to listen very closely right now. Like men benefiting from the patriarchy, all white people benefit from white supremacy. It is white people's job to dismantle white supremacy. We get unearned privileges as the result of the way policies and laws and institutions were designed. And we can very much use those privileges to the detriment of black folks and other folks of color. And when white people come out here and say stuff like this dude, like, doesn't she know she's white? And you're trying to call out racism and hold other white folks accountable, that is white supremacy in action, my friends. They want to dismiss and detract from what you're saying because it makes them uncomfortable and exposes the racist nature of both their individual lives and collective society. So for my fellow white folks, I really encourage you to read Layla F. Saad's book called Me and White Supremacy. I found it super helpful. And she talks about the idea of white exceptionalism, which I also think we can extrapolate out to this not all men conversation. White exceptionalism basically, at least in part, having to do with you feeling like you're one of the good ones. And we see guys saying this with like, I'm a nice guy, or I'm not one of the bad guys. And the problem with this attitude is that it stops you from seeing the problems that are right in front of you. And it's also really dangerous because it makes it about good versus bad, or who you are as a person, if you're an inherently good person, when this conversation isn't about you. It's about the harm that you are unaware that you are causing to other people and you may cause to them in the future. And one of the reasons that I try to speak out about racism and white supremacy, one of the reasons why I'm continually trying to do better in this realm, is because research has actually shown that people are more likely to believe somebody that shares the same racial identity as them. So white folks are more likely to believe me about racism being a systemic, serious problem that we all have to work to solve. It's fucked, but if I have this knowledge, I might as well use it to try and do something good with it. So I'm going to end with this. I have and will continue to make mistakes attempting to do anti-racist work and show up for folks of color in my personal life and more broadly. I haven't always spoken up when I should have. I let Black women do the work that I should have been doing. And so I am continuing to make a concerted effort to listen, learn, and do more every day. And so as part of that journey, I am not going to let other white folks, whether it's white men or white feminists, try to dismiss and detract from this work. I have sometimes remained silent because I was scared of saying the wrong thing, or I was scared of dealing with trolls like this. And ultimately, the choice to remain silent is a privileged one. I'm certainly able and need to be able to deal with internet trolls and also, again, legitimate, valuable feedback from marginalized communities about my discussions. Because, for example, Black folks are out there worrying if their wives are going to make it through labor and delivery because doctors don't take them seriously, or if their sons are going to make it home at night alive after a routine traffic stop. I think I can handle a little online criticism in an effort to create a more equitable, safe world for everybody.